ESPN's Mike Clay recently ranked each NFL roster 1 through 32 by position group. So by quarterback, and then by running back, and then by tight end, and so on. Then he weighted each position group by importance and depth throughout the NFL and gave each team a composite score based just on roster at this time in the year, understanding that the rosters change and coaching has a big impact on where these teams will land. So I thought it was really interesting. An unbiased look, not a local 49er fanboy ranking the Niners, not someone who only watches the 49ers either, someone who watches the entire league and has no dog in the fight. Is that the expression? I don't know. Let's go through what the 49ers got in this exercise, starting at quarterback. Out of 32 teams, Mike Clay of ESPN ranked the 49ers 24th at quarterback, which might seem a little low. It'd be interesting to know where they would be if they had Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo isn't good enough, but at least he's like a known quantity. You know the Niners can win with him. I think national people sort of would weigh that higher. Locally, we saw what Brock Purdy did. I think a lot of people feel like, maybe Sam Darnold could do that. But until Sam Darnold proves he can, until Brock Purdy comes back and proves he's the same guy he was last year, until he proves that he can throw with the same arm strength and really that wasn't just a flash in the pan, or maybe Trey Lance steps up, I don't see how you give the Niners anything higher than that. They don't know who their week one quarterback's going to be. How many teams in the NFL don't know who their week one quarterback's going to be? They say Brock Purdy is their guy, but they're talking about a guy with 8 starts. So, yeah, 24 seems fair, but it definitely seems like they have the potential to skyrocket. I mean, what if Trey Lance fixes his throwing mechanics like it looks like he's doing, starts week one, and takes off? Or what if Brock Purdy makes a full recovery? Or what if Sam Darnold really is the next Alex Smith and he just needed structure and Kyle Shanahan? So 24 with potential to improve. Running back. Also, real quick, I said that Mike Clay was weighting each position by importance. So quarterback factors into 28% of the final grade. Just want to point that out. Running back, Niners ranked number 1. Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason. I don't know if Deebo Samuel factors into this ranking, but he should because he's absolutely part of the Niners running back rotation. I mean, the Niners would have the best running back rotation in the NFL if Kyle rotated his running backs, but sometimes he gets a little Christian McCaffrey fixated. That's going to be a key for this season, not overusing Christian McCaffrey in September, October, November, because he was their MVP on offense last year. They need him playing really well down the stretch in the playoffs. But they fortunately Elijah Mitchell is a starting level running back and a good one. Same with Jordan Mason. 3 starting level running backs plus the best fullback in the league, and Kyle Juszczyk. You could argue running back is the Niners' strongest position. I mean, 3 deep plus the fullback plus the wide receiver who plays running back. It's like 5 deep of guys who are really, really good. Unfortunately, in this exercise, running back only takes up 3% of the final grade. Argue with Mike Clay about it. Wide receiver. Out of 32 teams, the Niners currently rank 11th at wide receiver. I think that's fair. If Deebo Samuel is 100% healthy and weighing 215 pounds and tip-top shape like Brandon Ayuk always is, they could be better than that. Because Jawan Jennings is pretty consistent. Ayuk's pretty consistent. Deebo fluctuates. He can be the best player on the field. He can be, someone who shouldn't be getting the ball as much as he does. Someone who should be in the doghouse but never is, which is kind of interesting. But 11, I think, is fair. Upper half of the league. Upper third. Tight end, 3. Oh, actually, hold on. Wide receiver, that factors in 11% of the grade. So that's important. Tight end. Out of 32 teams, the Niners rank 3rd behind Kansas City and Baltimore. I mean, really, if they had a second tight end, you could argue they'd be number 1 because Kansas City doesn't really have a second tight end. The Niners should have a second tight end. Kittle's been having to do way too much for a long time, but this is another major strength of the 49ers team. Unfortunately, in this exercise, tight end, only 4% of the final grade. Offensive line. This was surprising. 30th out of 32 teams. The 3rd worst offensive line in the league on paper. I mean, I think you and I probably feel like, what's the big deal? They lost Mike McGlinchey. Did it really fall apart that much? The answer is no. But when you look at the offensive line, Trent Williams is great, Hall of Famer. Other than him, no one else has started more than a season in the league. No one else you would even say is necessarily a good player. Aaron Banks and Jake Brendel are solid. Spencer Burford was in a rotation last year. Like maybe he improves, but I couldn't even call him solid yet. Colton McKivitz, has started 5 games. Couldn't call him solid either. So the Niners are a team that has essentially one good established offensive lineman. I could see 29 teams having more established offensive linemen on paper. So yeah, this is bad. This is the Niners' weakest position by far. I think you knew that. You didn't need Mike Clay of ESPN to tell you that. Offensive line is 12% of the final grade. And what's interesting, of all the position groups, obviously quarterback has the biggest impact, 28%. Second biggest impact on the final grade is offensive line, 12%. Wide receivers, 11%. Cornerbacks, 10.5%. Now, defensive line. Let's get to defensive line. It's 17% of the final grade. So you could argue it's more important than offensive line, but they break it up. They do interior and the edge. So in the interior, the defensive interior, the Niners are number 2 out of 32 teams. Excellent. That's because they just signed Javon Hargrave. They still have Javon Kinlaw, who's a first-round pick, although I don't know if he factors into this grade. And they have Eric Armstead, who has played at a very high level, although he was hurt most of last year and only played half the year and only had 0 sacks only. So that's a little generous, the second best interior. But if Eric Armstead and Javon Hargrave are fully healthy, playing at their top, then it is that good. So I'm not quibbling with it. It's just like, how many games will the Niners get of Hargrave and Armstead playing at their best? They're both 30 or getting there. But that's a fair grade. Edge, 17, which is surprising, but it's fair because on one side, you got the best edge rusher in the league or one of them. And on the other side, you got no one. Maybe you got Drake Jackson. Maybe. So if Drake Jackson establishes himself as a good edge rusher, then now the Niners would be one of the better edge rushing groups in the league, but not yet. So far, they're not really a group. They're a guy, and Nick Bosa. So I think 17 is fair. Linebacker, hold on. Interior, defensive interior, that's 8% of the final grade, and edge, 9% of the final grade. Sorry about that. Linebacker, number 1. It's the second position the Niners have the best group of players in the league. Linebacker, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw. They lost Azeez Al-Shaair, still number 1, which is true. I mean, how many? Then what's unique about Greenlaw and Warner is that they're good at both coverage and run defense. How many linebackers in the league are good at both? And how many teams have 2 of those guys? I think the Niners might be the only ones, at least off the top of my head. There might be a couple others. But I think what also is unique about these 2, Greenlaw and Warner, incredibly versatile. They do everything well, but what they do best is cover. They hit hard. They're excellent against the run, but what they do best is cover, which means they're perfect linebackers for the NFL and a lot of people for modern NFL. And a lot of people feel like, man, linebacker isn't that important. You shouldn't be investing in that position because the running game doesn't matter that much, or it matters so much less in the passing game, which is true. But linebackers who can cover, they're rare. And they're an important part of your coverage. If you're going to be playing zone coverage, those guys are the underneath guys. If you're playing man-to-man coverage, those guys are covering tight ends. So linebacker is important. The Niners have 2 modern ones who are excellent. 6.5% of the final grade. Cornerback, 24. Lower than I expected. But, you think about it. You got Travarius Ward, who's good, not great, but good. Diamador Lenore, who finished the season very strong, but hasn't started that many games and has had some really bad performances too. So there's a question mark there. And then what else after that? You don't even know who the starting nickel is going to be. Isaiah Oliver, Sam Womack, like guys who need to prove themselves. So 24, that's a little bit lower. I thought they would be more like 16 or 17, but it's a premium position. And the Niners really only have one guy that they're invested in there. Everyone else is sort of like a flyer or a late pick. That's 10.5% of the final grade. I think the Niners need to start taking cornerback a little bit more seriously. They're so invested in the defensive line. But what's interesting? I'm looking at it. D-line is 17%, but the back seven linebackers and corners, that's 17% too of the final grade. They're both equally important, coverage and pass rush, apparently. Safety. Actually, no. I'm bad at math because safety counts too. So if you add up linebackers, cornerbacks, and safeties, that's 25% of the final grade. So it seems like your back seven is more important than your front four. But maybe that's because 7 is more than 4. I'm sorry, I'm confusing you. Safeties. Niners ranked 9th out of 32 teams. Which is, I get it. I mean, those two, Talanoa Hufanga and Tashawn Gibson, intercepted a ton of passes last year. Like, what was it, 10, 11? When was the last time the Niners had a safety duo that intercepted that many passes? Not a lot of teams have that. I think if Tashawn Gibson was 23 instead of 33, they'd probably rank a lot higher here. And eventually they will have to replace him because he's older and he's on a 1-year deal, I believe. But safety is a very strong position for the 49ers, and they're going to have Talanoa for a while. So that's 8% of the final grade. They have, to recap before I give you the overall grade, that's number 1 at running back, number 2 at the defensive interior, number 3 at tight end, number 1 at linebacker, number 9 at safety. A very, very good roster with questions at quarterback, 24th, and offensive line, 30th. And cornerback, 24th. Overall, Mike Clay of ESPN ranks the Niners roster 16th out of 32, right in the middle, which is shocking, right? Because you think of the Niners, it's like, hey, they got the best roster in the league if you take quarterback out of it. Well, maybe. But again, quarterback is 28% of the final grade here, and the Niners rank 24th out of 32 teams at quarterback in this exercise. That could flip if Trey Lance takes off, Sam Darnold takes off, Brock Purdy makes a full recovery quick. But until that happens, it's fair to be skeptical of this particular team and wonder is this going to be a down year? Is this going to be a 2020 year where the Niners are cycling through a bunch of quarterbacks who haven't had success and are lacking experience? Don't know. So 16 seems low. It's obviously about the quarterback ranking. And you say, well, there's a high probability that one of these 3 quarterbacks is going to succeed this year and take off and play well. The thing that's working against them, and you say, is a high probability because you got the number 1 running back group, you got the number 11 wide receiver group, the number 3 tight end group, you got the best linebackers, the second best defensive tackles. It's a lot helping the quarterback here, plus Kyle Shanahan. Yeah, but the offensive line is the 3rd worst in the league on paper. That's not helping a quarterback. Sam Darnold lacks confidence. Trey Lance hasn't played in 3 years, coming off a serious injury. Brock Purdy coming off a serious injury. I mean, confidence could be an issue for all 3 of these quarterbacks. And you're giving them the 3rd worst offensive line in the league on paper. So that would be a reason to sort of bet against the 49ers this year. Everything hinges on the quarterback position, and they don't really have the offensive line to make their lives easier, right? I mean, they have the running back position, but that's 3% of the final grade. What's more important, running backs or offensive linemen? Mike Clay of ESPN says it's offensive linemen. I would too, but Kyle Shanahan seems to think it's running backs. I guess we'll see. 16th. Guess they think the Niners could be 9-8 this year. Well, 9-8 can still win the NFC West. I'll just put it that way. As long as the Niners get in playoffs, we'll see what happens and who their quarterback is at that point.